So we'll move on to PM 2.5. And since PM 2.5 is also a continuous pollutant, we can use the same box up here to run through the final data validation process for PM 2.5. So all we need to do is change our site ID, sampler ID, pollutant, sampling year, and then we can run through that process for PM 2.5. So my PM 2.5 sampler is located at site ID S98. The sampler ID is INP 25. The pollutant is PM 2.5, and the sampling year is 2015. So the same thing here, since I've only imported 2 weeks of data into the toolbox, this date range is only showing the 2 weeks I imported. But if you have multiple imports for 2015, this is going to show the date range for all of them. So if you want to just look at a 2-week period, you need to change this range here. But for me, since I only have one data set imported so far for PM 2.5, this is the data range I want to use. And again, this graph is meaningless because of these large concentrations up here where I can't see anything what's going on down here. So I need to invalidate some of this data because obviously something went wrong here. So let me look at my field logbook and see what was going on here. So I have some sort of tape error that happened, and that's why I have large values here. So I'm just going to begin by looking at all of the qualified data. So I'm going to click on View Only Qualified Data button, and that's going to show all of my data. So I look at my logbook, and I determine that I need to invalidate all of these that are flagged with a Q1, because that's when the tape error occurred. So that, according to my logbook, is a lot of records. That's a total of 77 records. And to go through and do that by hand is going to take me a lot of time. Luckily, the Toolbox has a process that you can do it all at once, that the Toolbox will just add that flag for you, and you don't have to go through and do it individually for each of these records. So I'm going to close out of this, and now I look at my logbook, and I say, what were the dates that I need to invalidate? And my logbook says it was 1/7/2015 at 2 a.m. through 1/10/2015 at 6 a.m. So I need to change this range to only the range that I want to invalidate. So to do that, I click on the drop down, and I'm going to start typing 17. And that's going to bring this list to 17 rather quickly, so I don't have to scroll through the entire thing. So 17 at 2 a.m. And then it ended, the tape error stopped at 1:10 at 6 a.m. So 1:10 at 6 a.m. And you'll see that now look at my chart. So obviously something went wrong here, and we know that there was a tape error because look at these values that just go on and on. This obviously is not valid data. So I want to invalidate all of this data. So to do that, I can select an invalidation code from here. So this was a machine malfunction. This is a tape error. So I gotta select the machine malfunction invalidation code, and then I can click on invalidate only qualified date in selected range. Notice it says invalidate only qualified data. So to use this process, you need to have flagged the data ahead of time. If you didn't flag the data, it wouldn't invalidate it. So it's only going to invalidate flagged data in this range. And we can tell that this data is flagged because all of these points are yellow on my graph. So I know that I flagged that data. So if I click on this invalidate only qualified data in selected range button, let's see what happens. It gives me a message box and it's warning me. It's saying this step is going to invalidate all of the qualified continuous pollutant data that is not already invalidated in the selected range with the invalidation code you selected. And it's telling me that it's going to exclude the data from AQS. So it's just giving me a warning in case I didn't mean to do that. But I totally meant to do that, so I'm going to click OK. And then you're going to get this box about running a query, and it's going to be an update query. And you're just going to say yes because the toolbox is adding the invalidation code, and that's an update query, so I say yes. And then in the next box, it tells you how many records it's going to invalidate. So this is something you want to check against your logbook and make sure that matches what you thought it was in your logbook. And it does, so I'm going to click yes. So notice what happened to the graph. All of that data has now been invalidated and is no longer shown on the graph. Nothing is shown on the graph, and that's because in this entire range, but we have invalidated every data point in this entire range, so nothing is shown on the graph anymore. So I want to get back to my graph that shows the entire 2 weeks. So I need to change this range back to the 2-week range so I can see my other data points. So let's go back to the beginning of the date range and the end of the date range. Very end, scroll to the very end. Okay, so now we have a readable graph. I notice there's a flag point here that's very, very negative, and I'm guessing that's probably invalid. So let's take a look at the only the qualified data and see what's going on here. So this negative 15 is very negative, and it's actually below the absolute minimum for my sampler. So the absolute minimum, you can look on the list that shows in AQS, and you can see the absolute minimum for that sampler is -10, and that's something you can do from that link that when we imported the data, it says, click here to research the AQS methodology, and you can look on that link and see what the absolute minimum for your sampler is. So this one definitely is an error. So I'm going to go ahead and use the AQS null code here for that. Let's see what I want to use. I'm going to use the machine malfunction again because I think something went wrong with my instrument. But if you had written something in your logbook that was more specific, you could use a more specific code. But I'm just going to use this machine malfunction. And now I need to decide about these other flagged points, what I want to do with them. So if I needed to go back into the SOP to determine what any of these meant, I could do that. So DUP, what does that mean? DUP means 3 or more duplicate consecutive concentration values. So I don't see any reasons to invalidate those. I'm going to leave those as is. And then I've got some others that are R, which is out of range. And these are low. They're actually below the federal method detection limit. But just because a value is low doesn't mean that it needs to be invalidated. And that's often what happens is when people look through their data, they see these negative values and they go through and invalidate them for no reason. And it's really important not to do that because AQS wants values that are low as long as they're not excessively low like this -15 because they need to have those values to get the average to balance out over time. So if the value is negative, it doesn't mean that you need to invalidate it unless there was some other reason for that invalidation, like you have something in your logbook that says, oh, here, something went wrong. But just because a value is low doesn't mean you should invalidate it unless you have some other reason of invalidating that data. For this particular one, we had another reason because it was below the absolute minimum for the sampler. So this one was really low, and we had to invalidate it. So let's scroll through. So these are all of the tape errors, lots of tape error, and then I've got some more HD30 and HD6. What's the difference between this HD30 and HD6? Remember when I imported that data, I ran the consecutive measurement difference twice. I did it for a difference of 6 micrograms per meters cubed, and also a difference of 30. So that's why I have 2 of those. And I don't see anything else that's very unusual. And I checked in my logbook, and I don't have any additional reason to invalidate any of these data points. So I'm going to say that I have completed this process for PM 2.5. So I'm going to close the screen, and I'm going to write down in my database logbook that I completed the final data validation process for PM 2.5 between 1/5/2015 and 1/9/2015, and that I invalidated one record that was below the absolute minimum for my sampler, and I invalidated 77 records because of the tape error that was in my logbook.